with the U.S. Geological Survey, and today we are going to participate in a pilot project called Knowledge Capture. We will have a roundtable discussion with other volcanologists, and the idea is to try and bring out some of the knowledge and experiences of volcanologists that would not normally appear in the written literature. I work at the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, primarily on Mauna Loa. I'm considered one of the junior scientists, and I'm acting as the facilitator for today.
My name is Rick Hoblet. I'm with the U.S. Geological Survey in the Cascades Volcano Observatory in Vancouver, Washington.
I'm Ed Wolf. I'm a recently retired USGS geologist, retired from the Cascades Volcano Observatory. I'm continuing some geologic work at Mount St. Helens, but on a part-time basis.
I'm Don Swanson. I'm the scientist in charge of the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory, and in the past I spent 10 years at the Cascades Volcano Observatory also. I oversee the research and monitoring that is done at HVO.
Okay, so what we're going to do first is start with some very general questions to my colleagues here. The first question is, what was the defining moment that made you want to become a volcanologist? And the corollary to that is, when did you see your first volcanic eruption or volcano?
Well, I'll start. The defining moment for me was when, with the exception of a few steps on Hawaiian soil at the airport in Hilo, I got out of the car and walked about 20 feet to the rim of Halemaumau during an eruption in November of 1967. I was scheduled to come over to HVO that next spring, but I really wasn't into volcanology yet per se. But that experience, just walking over the rim, looking down and seeing the lava lake erupting in the crater, was, I think, what turned my career around.
Ed?
Well, I had a gradual evolution into it. I'm not sure I can identify a defining moment. Early in my career, I got involved in some awful country in southwestern Washington where there were submarine basalt lava flows that were faulted and folded and had many meters of soil on them. And after that, I got an invitation to go to Flagstaff, Arizona, and was immediately drawn to it because of the San Francisco volcanic field, where all the volcanic rocks were there at the surface, beautifully exposed, and I could really understand what was going on. So I worked for a number of years in young volcanic rocks without an idea of being a volcanologist per se, and it was that work in young volcanic rocks that led to an invitation for me to go to the Hawaiian Volcano Observatory in 1982. I actually saw my first eruption, though, back in the late 60s when I went to Hawaii with an Apollo crew for training the Apollo 12 crew, and saw the eruption going on in Mauna Ulu.
Well, I didn't set out to become a volcanologist. I just sort of stumbled into it, I guess. I started in graduate school studying paleomagnetism, and a friend of mine, Dan Miller, who was working at the USGS, explained to me some of the problems that they were having with trying to understand the mechanisms that emplaced various kinds of volcanic deposits. And I said, well, maybe I can help with that, with some paleomagnetism. And so I started working on that, and eventually changed my dissertation topic, and I worked with the USGS part-time while I was doing that, and then I was hired full-time to do volcano stratigraphy, and most of this work was on Mount St. Helens. And so that's what got me into it, is by happenstance. I was doing this before the volcano reawakened, and I found myself in the midst of one of the major geophysical events of what is now the last century, I guess. And it was being involved. I was lucky enough to be involved in that experience, and that's what sucked me into it. But the first eruption I saw, it wasn't much of an eruption, but it was, I was in Antigua in Guatemala and walking down the street, and I looked up and saw a puff come out of the top of Fuego. Mm-hmm. And I grabbed a local passerby there, and I said, "Is that volcano erupting?" And they gave me a confirmation on that, and that was the first one that I saw.
Do you care to mention what year that was?
It was 1979.
Okay. All right. The other thing I think is that as a younger member of Volcano Hazards team, I want to know something about who acted as a mentor and played in a role in your development as a volcanologist. And there might be more than one person, or there might be a single person. But who do you see was facilitated your career development growth?
Well, I can start.
Okay.
Again, I do have several. I suppose my thesis advisor when I was in graduate school at Johns Hopkins played a big role in getting me interested in the field side of volcanology, and that's really what I've been mainly interested in. But he had never seen an active volcano and hadn't for years and years until he visited me in Hawaii later on. I think probably the stimulation of the environment at HVO when I was there between 1968 and 71 was collectively an important mentor. Tom Wright was there. Dick Fisk was just leaving and had imparted me with a lot of ideas to follow up on. Wendell Duffield came along replacing Tom and had lots of ideas, and so it was that kind of collective mentorship that I think was really important for me.
Like Don, my dissertation advisor had a big influence on me, though he wouldn't describe himself as a volcanologist. He guided us to a lot of volcanic rocks for our paleomag work, and he had done some mapping in volcanic terrains. So, you know, not all the mentoring that we collect is necessarily focused directly on volcanology. It's on science in general. In volcanology specifically, Rocky Crandall, this is once I began to work for the USGS, and Don Molyneux, two guys that spent a lot of time in the field with me, showing me the nuts and bolts of volcano stratigraphy.
And probably to people who should be participating in a project like this.
And it's a good point.
Well, maybe they will eventually.
Yeah.
My graduate school experience had nothing whatsoever to do with volcanology. I went to graduate school in the Midwest. My dissertation advisor was a paleontologist. My dissertation dealt with stratigraphy in Mississippian sedimentary rocks in Ohio. And being a volcanologist couldn't have been farther from my mind than at that time. I suppose my first introduction to volcanic rocks in the field came in southwestern Washington with Park Snavely, and led me really stimulated me to take advantage of the opportunity to go to northern Arizona. I think I was probably, well, there weren't any other real volcanologists there. I had enough experience with with mapping to know how to address the San Francisco volcanic field, which I was very interested in exploring and learning about. I'm not sure there was much mentorship in volcanology or even volcanic geology there. When I got to HVO, I found, of course, lots of colleagues who were very much involved in volcano monitoring in particular. And I got a tremendous amount from some of the old hands at HVO. I mentioned Bob Koyanagi and Arnold Okamura in particular, who were always willing to fill in newcomers on what the volcano, what was going on, and what phenomena at the volcano meant. And I think that was a very important part of my mentoring. Going to HVO really redirected my career from studies of cold volcanic rocks to interest in volcanic processes. So that was a turning point for me.
You know, Frank, I kind of think there's a through-going theme here, and that is that none of the three of us started out as volcanologists, and we didn't take any significant courses in volcanology, or we didn't plan to be that, and we sort of grew into it sort of by luck and chance and interest and opportunities that arose. I think now the situation is different because there's a lot more teaching of volcanology in universities, and people really are trained far better initially than we ever were at first. We had to learn by the seat of our pants, more or less. I think that's kind of an interesting thing that's come out of this.
I think that's true. I think that the point I guess I was trying to make was I should have said who acted as a mentor, because the principles of working in science is good mentorship will ensure that good science is being done. And so maybe that wasn't. The follow-up is that what I wanted to do is, you mentioned your advisor and Rick mentioned his advisor, but you didn't mention them by name, so maybe we should put that in the record.
Okay, well, my advisor, actually I can mention two. Aaron Waters was the principal advisor, and he was getting close to retirement then. He taught for only a few years longer. And then Cliff Hobson, who was just kind of starting out his career and subsequently had a long and distinguished career at the University of California, Santa Barbara. So those two people were my thesis advisors and helped get me going on old volcanic rocks, but nothing that was hot to the touch.
Right. One advisor only, Ed Larson at the University of Colorado in Boulder. Edwin E. Larson.
Okay.
There's a lot of Ed Larsons out there.
Right. Okay. One thing we didn't do, well, I didn't do as a facilitator, was to enunciate what a volcanologist is. So that would be a good question to ask in each of you. What is a volcanologist?
Well, I guess in the broadest terms, it's a volcano researcher. But yeah, it is a broad term, because volcanologists tend to be a jack of all trades. And you'll find that people with a wide variety of specialties call themselves volcanologists, and it sort of arises naturally that way when you work on volcanoes, especially active volcanoes, is that you have to adapt to do whatever needs to be done in a variety of situations, and so you do become a generalist.
Okay.
I guess I would say that a volcanologist is a student of volcanoes, volcanic geology, and volcanic processes. I agree with Rick's comment about jack of all trades. In fact, at the time that I joined the Geological Survey, I think one of the things that really drew me into geology and